Hey everyone, you know what? There are nights when I sit back and watch the world spin, wondering where all the strange things around us truly begin. And if you are like me, carrying 1,001 questions about the mysteries of life, then come with me and let us uncover them together. When Earth first came into existence around 4.5 billion years ago, it was nothing like the calm blue planet we know today. Imagine a world wrapped in fire and shadow, a surface boiling with molten rock, and an atmosphere filled with gases no living thing could survive. There were no forests, no oceans filled with life, not even the simplest of cells. Just a newborn planet, restless and roaring, trying to cool down enough to someday become a home for life. It is strange, is not it, to think of a time when not a single insect buzzed, crawled, or darted through the air. No wings, no legs, no tiny creatures hiding under leaves because there were no leaves, no soil, no land that could support anything. So, what changed? How did this fiery world transform into a place where billions of life forms would eventually flourish? And what conditions needed to align for the first spark of life to appear? Scientists believe that Earth's early chaos was actually part of the recipe volcanic activity shaping new minerals, lightning striking through the atmosphere, and comets delivering icy ingredients from far beyond. Bit by bit, the planet cooled. Water gathered in great basins, forming the first oceans. Temperatures settled. The atmosphere shifted. And somewhere in that immense stillness, the earliest building blocks of life began to emerge. It is almost unbelievable to imagine that everything alive today, every tree, every fish, every human, and yes, every insect, comes from a planet that once could not support even a single cell. But that is the magic of deep time. Earth changed, layer by layer, until life finally found a way to appear. And from that first spark, the entire story of life began. As Earth slowly cooled and the violent storms of its early years began to fade, something extraordinary started to happen in the oceans. These were not the familiar oceans we see today, but vast, dark waters rich with minerals and chemical energy. In this quiet, shifting world, simple organic molecules began to interact in ways that still feel almost mysterious. How did lifeless ingredients suddenly arrange themselves into something that could grow, change, and copy itself? Was it a lucky accident or an inevitable step once the conditions were just right? Scientists still debate the details, but one thing is certain: the earliest forms of life emerged from these ancient seas. At first, they were incredibly small, single-celled organisms with no eyes, no limbs, no awareness. Just tiny, fragile pockets of chemistry, capable of surviving in a harsh and unpredictable environment. But even these simple cells were enough to change everything. Once life appeared, it did not stay still. It adapted. It multiplied. It experimented with new shapes, new ways of using energy, new methods of surviving. Imagine countless microscopic beings drifting through the water, dividing again and again, leaving behind endless generations. Over millions of years, these early organisms became the foundation for every living thing that would come after. It is almost poetic to think that the entire story of Earth forests, animals, civilizations, and even the insects buzzing around us today can be traced back to tiny cells floating in a silent ocean. And it makes you wonder, if something so small could lead to such an astonishing diversity of life, what other transformations were waiting further down the timeline? What new forms were hidden in the future, waiting for the right moment to evolve? From those first tiny cells drifting through the ancient oceans, life began a slow, steady journey toward complexity. It did not happen in a sudden leap, but through countless small steps, each one almost invisible on its own. Imagine the planet at that time, vast waters stretching everywhere, sunlight filtering down in soft, scattered rays, and microscopic organisms quietly experimenting with new ways to survive. Some learned to use sunlight for energy. Others found ways to consume the molecules around them. Little by little, simple cells joined together, forming larger bodies capable of doing more than any one cell ever could. This shift from single cells to multi-celled organisms marked one of the great turning points in Earth's history. It opened the door to an astonishing variety of shapes and abilities. But the oceans held even more possibilities. As these early multi-celled forms evolved, they began to develop tiny structures for movement, sensing, feeding, and protection. At first, these were still soft and simple, but they hinted at the future. Fins, shells, segments, limbs. Life was quietly preparing for the next big step, becoming animals. Picture a world where the first primitive creatures crawled along the ocean floor, exploring their environment, responding to currents and light. It is strange to think that these humble ancestors would someday give rise to entire branches of life: fish, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and yes, the early arthropods that would eventually lead to insects. The thought is almost overwhelming. How did something so small and simple hold the potential for such complexity? How could tiny clusters of cells, drifting in silence, contain the seeds of every future creature on Earth? Yet that is exactly how life unfolded gradually, curiously, as if the planet itself was learning how to create more intricate forms with each passing age. As life continued to evolve in the oceans, one particular group of creatures began to stand out: the ancient arthropods. These early beings did not look anything like the insects we see today, but they carried the blueprint that would eventually make insects possible: segmented bodies, jointed legs, hard outer shells. Picture them moving across the ocean floor, small, armored, determined, exploring every crack and corner of their underwater world. Some resembled simple shrimp-like forms. Others looked like tiny armored plates sliding over the sand. They were among the first animals to develop true mobility and structure, and their designs were so effective that versions of them still exist today in crabs, lobsters, and spiders. But what made them truly fascinating was their potential. Each little adaptation, a tougher shell, a sharper sense of direction, a new way to breathe, nudged them one step closer to a major evolutionary leap. At some point, these ancient arthropods began to encounter new possibilities. The coastline became richer, plants started appearing at the edges of the water, and the boundary between sea and land began to look less like a barrier and more like an opportunity. What would it take for a creature built for the ocean to survive on land? Stronger limbs. A way to keep moisture inside the body, a method of breathing outside the water. Over countless generations, some arthropod lineages slowly developed these traits. They ventured onto damp shores, then into mossy patches, then into the open air. This transition was not quick or dramatic. It was quiet, gradual, almost invisible in real time. But it changed everything. Because once animals learned to live on land, a whole new world opened up for evolution to explore. And hidden somewhere within these early explorers was the distant ancestor of every insect that would one day crawl, jump, or fly across the earth. As plants began to spread across the land, transforming bare rock into green landscapes, the stage was set for one of evolution's most important migrations. Life was no longer limited to the oceans. Ferns, mosses, and the earliest land plants created shade, moisture, food, and shelter, a brand new world waiting to be explored. And slowly, cautiously, the first land-dwelling animals followed. Among them were the early ancestors of insects, small arthropods experimenting with a life beyond the shoreline. Imagine how alien the world must have looked to them. Vast stretches of untouched land, towering plants, strange new scents in the air, and a dry atmosphere they had never experienced before. What drove them forward? Hunger, curiosity, or simply the quiet push of evolution, favoring those that could endure life outside the water just a little better than others? Over time, these pioneers developed the tools they needed to survive. Their bodies became more efficient at conserving moisture. Their breathing systems adapted to the open air. Their limbs grew stronger, more flexible, better suited for climbing, crawling, and hiding beneath leaves. And slowly, a new kind of animal began to take shape, small, quick, and perfectly designed for life on land. What is fascinating is how this single step opened the door to an explosion of diversity. Once arthropods settled on land, the possibilities multiplied. Different shapes, different diets, different strategies for survival. Some became burrowers, others climbers, others agile predators hiding among the plants. Evolution seemed to be experimenting, testing one new body plan after another. And somewhere along this branching timeline, the earliest true insects appeared tiny creatures that would eventually dominate nearly every corner of the planet. From those early land-dwelling arthropods came one of evolution's most remarkable transformations, the rise of the first true insects. At this stage in Earth's history, the world was still quiet, still mostly empty compared to the forests and fields we know today. Yet something extraordinary was happening in the small spaces under leaves, inside damp soil, along the edges of primitive plants. Tiny creatures were adapting, refining their bodies, and discovering entirely new ways to survive. Their segmented forms became lighter, more flexible. Their exoskeletons hardened. Their senses sharpened. And slowly, these ancient arthropods split into new branches, including the earliest insects. It is incredible to imagine that such small organisms carried the seeds of future complexity, is not it? That inside their simple bodies were the clues for wings, compound eyes, antennae, and all the features that would one day define the insect world. What pushed them forward? Was it competition for food, the need to escape predators, or simply the natural process of evolution exploring every possibility over millions of years? Whatever the reason, these early insects adapted to land in ways nothing else had done before. They explored cracks in bark, climbed between stems, and fed on the new plant life spreading across the land. Their small size became an advantage, allowing them to hide, travel, and survive in places larger creatures could never reach. And what is even more fascinating is how quickly they diversified once they appeared. Some evolved mouthparts for chewing plants. Others developed piercing structures for feeding on fluids. Different shapes and strategies emerged, like branches spreading across a tree. The insect world was beginning its great expansion, one that would eventually lead to the billions of species we see today, each one descended from these early, fragile pioneers. As plants continued to spread across Earth's surface, they did not just reshape the landscape, they reshaped the future of every creature living on it. The earliest plants were simple, but they created something priceless: stability. Shade, moisture, shelter, and food began to appear in places where once there had been nothing but bare rock and dust. And this quiet transformation changed everything for the early insects. Imagine standing in a world that was once silent and empty, now slowly filling with soft green life. Ferns rising out of the soil, patches of moss spreading across the ground, and clusters of simple plants reaching toward the light. For the first insects, plants were not just scenery, they were opportunity, a place to hide from danger, a source of nourishment, a platform to climb, explore, and eventually to dominate. It is almost poetic to think about how deeply connected insects and plants became. Without plants, insects would have had no foothold on land. And without insects, plants would later struggle to spread and reproduce. This relationship did not appear suddenly. It grew slowly, generation after generation. Early insects learned to feed on tender leaves, spores, and plant juices. Some learned to burrow into stems. Others began living within dense clusters of vegetation, where new forms of shelter and food were always within reach. And with each small change, the bond between insects and plants grew stronger. Plants shaped insects, encouraging new adaptations in their bodies and behaviors. Insects shaped plants in return, influencing the spread of greenery across the planet. This quiet partnership would eventually transform Earth into the lush, vibrant world we recognize today. But at this point in history, it was still just beginning a subtle dance between two forms of life that were learning, step by step, how to build an entire ecosystem together. As millions of years passed, the changes that began quietly in the shadows of early plant life started to leave clear marks in the fossil record. Among those marks were the unmistakable remains of the first true insects, tiny bodies preserved in ancient rock, offering us a glimpse into a world long gone. These insects, some dating back more than 400 million years, were simple compared to the species we know today, yet they were fully formed in their own way. They had segmented bodies, jointed legs, antennae, and the basic structures that would eventually diversify into the countless designs we see in modern insects. Just imagine the Earth at that time, strange forests of giant ferns and mosses, humid air rising from swampy ground, and tiny creatures moving through the undergrowth, leaving almost no trace except for the rare fossils we uncover now. It is fascinating to think that these delicate remains, some no bigger than a grain of rice, tell the story of the first insects to ever crawl across land. Finding these fossils raises so many intriguing questions. What did those insects eat? How did they behave? Did they hide from predators we no longer know? Fossils can only tell part of the story, yet even that small part feels like a whisper from a distant era. These early insects were not yet the flyers or complex builders we see today, but they were pioneers. They tested what it meant to live on land, to explore plants, to survive in evolving ecosystems. In every adaptation they developed, harder exoskeletons, sharper senses, more efficient movement laid the groundwork for the astonishing diversity that would follow. In these ancient fossils, we see the first chapter of the insect world written in stone, waiting patiently through the ages for us to read. One of the most astonishing moments in the history of life came when insects developed the ability to fly. Imagine a world where nothing had ever taken to the air before, no birds, no bats, no winged reptiles. The skies were completely empty. And then, from small land-dwelling ancestors, some insects evolved lightweight bodies, strengthened exoskeletons, and delicate, flexible structures that could catch the wind. These early wings did not appear overnight. They emerged through countless small changes, each one offering a tiny advantage. Maybe a flap helped an insect glide down from a leaf. Maybe a broader surface helped it escape a predator. Step by step, evolution transformed those early structures into true wings, and suddenly, the entire sky was open to them. It is incredible to think that insects were the first animals in Earth's history to achieve flight, taking to the air more than 100 million years before any other creature even attempted it. What must that world have looked like? Vast forests of ancient plants rising into humid air, with early insects darting between branches, buzzing above swamps, and gliding through patches of sunlight. Flight transformed everything for them. It gave them access to new food, sources, new hiding places, and new environments that were impossible to reach before. It allowed them to escape danger in seconds. It helped them spread across continents. And perhaps most importantly, it sparked one of the greatest explosions of diversity in evolutionary history. With wings, insects became explorers, travelers, survivors. They moved through every layer of the environment, from the soil to the treetops, from still ponds to open plains. And once they mastered the skies, there was no going back. They had unlocked a new dimension of life, and soon the air was filled with creatures that had never existed before. When we look at insects today, the buzzing, crawling, gliding, shimmering creatures that fill nearly every corner of our world, it is easy to forget just how ancient their story really is. They did not appear suddenly, and they were not created all at once. Instead, insects are the product of an unbelievably long chain of changes, mistakes, experiments, and tiny improvements stretched across billions of years. every stage of their evolution, from drifting single-celled organisms to ocean-dwelling arthropods, from land explorers to the first winged beings, added another layer to their design. It is almost mind-bending to consider the insects we see today, from the delicate wings of a dragonfly to the sturdy armor of a beetle, are all descendants of those early pioneers, shaped by deep time. And the key to their success was not strength or size, it was adaptability. No matter how Earth changed, insects found a way to adjust. They survived shifting climates, new predators, mass extinctions, and dramatic changes in landscapes. Their incredible variety shows just how flexible life can be when given enough time and opportunity. So when we ask, where did insects come from? The answer reaches far beyond what we see around us. They came from chemistry before life existed, from tiny cells learning to copy themselves, from ancient oceans full of experiments and possibilities. They came from creatures brave enough or simply lucky enough to step onto land and explore a world that had never known animals before. And they came from evolution's endless creativity, shaping wings, eyes, colors, behaviors, and bodies in ways that still amaze us today. Insects are not just small creatures living among us. They are living reminders of Earth's entire history, carrying within them a story written over nearly 4 billion years. As we reach the end of this quiet journey through Earth's earliest ages, take a moment to imagine the vast sweep of time behind us. From a planet born in fire to oceans filled with drifting cells, from ancient arthropods crawling across the seabed to the first insects taking to the sky, the story of life has never been a simple straight line. It is a tapestry woven from small chances, slow changes, and countless generations adapting to a world that never stopped shifting. And in many ways, insects are the perfect symbol of that story. They are tiny, yet incredibly resilient. Fragile in appearance, yet strong enough to survive events that wiped out entire species. Their wings, colors, and shapes reflect not just the environments they live in, but the long history of the Earth itself. What makes this journey so fascinating is not just where insects came from, but what their story reveals about life as a whole. Life did not begin with purpose or direction. It began in silence, grew in uncertainty, and flourished through patience and possibility. The first insects did not know they were pioneers. They simply adapted, step by step, to whatever challenges and opportunities the planet offered. And over time, those small steps created a world buzzing with movement, sound, and color. So the next time you see a dragonfly gliding over a pond, or a tiny ant carrying a leaf bigger than itself, try to see more than just a small creature. See a survivor of ancient oceans, a descendant of early explorers, a living echo of Earth's deep past. The story of insects is really the story of life, finding endless ways to continue delicate, determined, and always evolving. And if you carry the same questions I do, feel free to leave a comment. And in the next part, if you subscribe to the channel, we will dive even deeper together and uncover everything step by step. And if you enjoy journeys like this, do not forget to like and share so more curious minds can join us.